Hello and welcome to my family pod, Myers and Solicitors Family Law Podcast. I'm your host today, Joe Ferguson, an associate in the family team. I was at a wedding this weekend, and a lot of people in between, Cotton Eye Joe and Come on Eileen were talking to me about family law issues. And the biggest issue that I was asked about was about co-parenting, and it's become a big hot topic. Um, 3 million children affected year on year, and those are just the divorce figures. And there's not been really a framework for assisting parents outside of the court arena, that is until now. So my guest today, Marcie Shaoul, has been assisting people with co-parenting issues since 2016, enabling parents to get to a place where they can work together, even if they don't particularly like each other. And she's written a book which is kind of new out, and it's been seen as somewhat of a revelation. My lovely friend Maura McKibben has written something in the Resolution Review magazine, which I just want to read out for listeners. Um, it could be best described, this book, as an operation manual for separated parents. My call to action is to spread the word about the co-parenting method far and wide. The more parents who know about this inspirational resource, the more children who can thrive and adjust in a healthy way as their family changes shape. This book will help parents, and by helping parents, we help children. That idea of it being inspirational is mirrored in the foreword of the book, which was written by the Right Honourable Sir Andrew McFarlane, who, for listeners who don't know, is the president of the family division. So we couldn't really do better in terms of a foreword. And he said, without, I hope, pushing things too far, I would suggest that part of the responsibility that comes with parental responsibility is to find a way of respecting the position of the other parent and sharing responsibility with them for the care of the child. I have no hesitation in endorsing this book. It is inspirational. This book is for practitioners like myself. A little bit of a watershed moment, I think. I think what it does is it allows us to provide clients early doors with the resource to be able to deal with these issues and the emotions associated with these issues independently. So I'd like to welcome today the author of the co-parenting method, our guest, Marcie Shaoul. Thank you for coming, Marcie.
Thank you, Joe. Wow, what an introduction. I am blushing and feel really proud. So thank you so much for saying all of that.
Well, I think it's really important to kind of set out what a big reaction this book has had, and from your perspective, Marcie, what have you seen? What's the kind of word on the street been in terms of the book?
It's been really positive. I've had positive feedback from family lawyers, from mediators, from parents. That's kind of it feels like it is a framework now. It's a tool. There's a tool there for parents to rely on and to hold on to as they're in a really tricky time, right? It's a tricky time to separate and to get divorced. And we don't always handle it with grace. And it's not about becoming friendly with your ex. It's about just getting through it in the way that's going to have the least negative impact on your kids. In fact, it can have a positive impact on your kids because they're not going to be in conflict.
So, in terms of obviously the framework of the book has come out of your own practice of assisting people with co-parenting issues. So, how did you get into that area?
So I was working in the diplomatic service and I used to run communications departments and I used to help governments and NGOs communicate with each other about particular issues, global issues. And what I saw when I was working in that space was just how badly people listened to each other, even when they were trying to do similar things. And it really struck me that actually it was the way that they were listening and it was the words that they were using meant that they were kind of going along parallel tracks and never really meeting. So, one of the things that I did in my work was to help almost like translate and find a way for them to talk to each other. Roll on 2009, and I went through my own separation and divorce, which was really tough, really, really tricky. Our son was one at the time. It was completely unexpected. And there was a lot of conflict, and it was a really difficult situation. And my best friend at the time, well, she's still my best friend, handed me a phone number. She was like, call this woman, she's a coach. And I'm like, it was 2009, people hadn't heard of coaching. I was like, what's a coach? I was thinking basketball. you know. I was like, what are you trying to do to me? And she's like, no, call the woman. She's called Sandra. She's amazing. And I did. And I had coaching. I had about 7 or 8 sessions of coaching. And it really changed the way I started to think about things. And as I was going through my own separation, there was no resources out there. There was nothing to hold on to. There was no framework. We were in a period of time where it was still traditional for mum to take on the children, and dad to kind of just visit every other weekend and be the fun dad. And I looked at my son and I was like, that can't be right. This can't be right. And I went out for a drink with somebody who I knew at the time, and he was divorced, and he was the only other person I knew that was divorced. And he said, you know what? Every kid needs to have their dad in their life. And he hadn't been in his son's life as much as he wanted to. And it really resonated with me, Joe. I was like, gosh, that is so true. What right do I have, even though I've been through this whole thing, which was really difficult, and my life had been turned upside down? That was my situation with my son's dad. And I thought, you know what? No, I've got to take a bigger picture view here. I've got to make sure my son is okay. And that means he needs a relationship with his dad. And I make it sound really easy. And it really wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to tell people around me that that's what was going to happen, because everyone was like, no, no, you shouldn't let that happen. You shouldn't let him see his dad. And I was like, no. And I had to stand firm. And even when it was difficult to co-parent with someone who I didn't trust anymore, I knew fundamentally that this was the right thing to do. So my diplomatic communication skills, the coaching that I'd been through, and then I retrained to become a coach in 2015. And I brought all of that together, and it became really clear to me that there was something that I could pull out here to create a resource for people like me who had been through something where they needed to learn a new set of skills in a different framework that they weren't expecting. And that's how it was created.
Well, I think it's very clear from the book, I think what's very clear is that you've kind of taken your own experiences and harnessed them for people, for the benefit of people, and really democratize this information and getting it into people's hands. I mean, it for one, on one level, it would have been very easy for you to kind of just continue on coaching, and obviously you do that as well, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But for you to give people this framework and them just be able to kind of deal with it themselves, I think is incredibly important. And I think what you've done is, allowed people the ability to see the wood for the trees in a really difficult period. And I think, given what you've said about the lack of resources available, I think that this is kind of a fundamental resource that practitioners, if you are listening, should be giving to their clients at an early stage. And certainly, I know that Maura has been, I know a lot of mediators are. Um, One thing, that really does ring through the book is the voice of the child. And I think that is really, really key to this whole process. And I think it can get lost. When you've got a client in coaching, what do you say to them when every sentence starts with I?
Good question. So we run a program now, which we'll talk about in a little while, and we start that program with step one of the book, which is, okay, you need to get into a long-term mindset here. You're going to be doing this for a while, and so it's not about you. It's about making this co-parenting system that you are now in work better for you, and that means that there are lots of different, I suppose, players in that system. And even though you might be feeling aggrieved, and even though you're probably rightly looking at this from your own perspective, what we need to do is shift it and look at it from your kids' perspective, because that is what is driving this idea of co-parenting that you said in the introduction, is kind of, it seems to be like the thing of the moment. And so helping parents understand that looking at it from their children's perspective is what will create less conflict, what will reduce conflict, means that they start to move away from I and they start to look at things from a different point of view. And I think that is when you can get a parent to do that, you're on the right pathway.
Now, one thing you've said is about the importance of a kind of parents independent of one another taking steps to read this book because the actual process is designed to go through on your own, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, you can go through it on your own or with your co-parent, but what I know is that it's really difficult when you're newly separated or in conflict to agree to go through a method together. So it was important to me to be able to articulate the methodology in a way that one parent can pick up the book, they can go through it, and they can actually change the way that their co-parenting is. Because by just tweaking your own behavior slightly, you can actually have a really big impact, positive impact in how your co-parenting kind of plays out.
Because I'm assuming one person kind of staying grounded and kind of sticking to this framework would help avoid kind of those flare points, those points of conflict.
Yeah, I mean, it takes two people to have an argument, right? So it does, it does. But, on the flip side of that, if you stay silent and you do something called stonewalling, that also fuels conflict. So it's about finding the balance. Um, and when you do that, you're showing your children, A, that you can still be a parent with the other parent, and B, that you're keeping yourself calm. Like nobody likes to exist in conflict. It's a horrible space to be in. So the tools in the book are about de-escalating conflict. It is effectively a conflict resolution book, looking at conflict resolution from different ways. So whether that's managing yourself, your emotions, whether that's setting proper boundaries, or how you listen and communicate and the language that you use.
Now, the book that we're talking about is called The Co-Parenting Method: Six Steps to Raise Happy Kids After Separation and Divorce. Um, and I suppose that raises the question that is co-parenting right for everyone? Are there situations in which co-parenting from your perspective wouldn't be appropriate and this framework isn't for them?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's certainly not a one size fits all. It's a one size fits many, though. And I would say where there are significant safeguarding issues, you might want to read it and take the bits that you find are useful for you, because there will be some things in there around communication and setting boundaries. But for some people, it is not safe to co-parent. It's better for them to parallel parent. And, this is a book to help prevent people from going to court. But sometimes you need to go to court. Sometimes I have people on my program and they are at such a point where they are getting, it's a really difficult situation and they go through the program, then they go to court, but it's more effective and resolves more quickly. And then they can get to a point where they can co-parent. But it is not for everybody. It can't be, because otherwise I'd have a magic wand and I'd be a fairy.
I know I always say this to clients. Clients say, "How do you think this is going to turn out?" And I said, "If I had a crystal ball, I'd
Yeah,
be a very, very, very rich man.
exactly, exactly.
And this jumper would be cashmere."
Yes. And this necklace would be solid gold. Yeah.
There we go. So there are 6 steps in the book that you set out. So steps are moving to a long-term mindset, managing strong emotions, setting boundaries and recognizing your co-parent's perspective, communicating without conflict, making good co-parenting decisions, and my favorite, beyond surviving to thriving. So in terms of steps, is it a serving suggestion that you deal with them in order, or is it kind of a choose your own adventure?
I'd say it's a serving suggestion that you go through them in order because they build on each other and there's a reason that they're in that order. But if you are in an emergency situation and you've got to communicate and you need to go straight to step four, by all means, go straight to step four, right? It's not rigid. Um, but the steps build on each other, right? If you can do step one and you can get into a long term mindset, it means that you're much more likely to make good choices about the language that you use, right? And keep calm. And then the second step is about managing some of those massive emotions that come with the situation that you're in, not just for you, but also so your children don't see you in a very high emotional state. And that's quite critical. And you probably need to do that step before you go into setting boundaries and seeing things from other perspectives, which is in step three. Because otherwise, you might just be like, no, I'm not doing this. Gotta be joking. Marcie, what are you talking about?
You've got to walk before you can run with these
You've
things,
got to
I
walk
think.
before you can run. Yes, you do.
I think it's also interesting to think about this as a framework that people can fall back on as situations evolve. Because I think a lot of people think that there is going to be this kind of I deal with everything, I deal with these emotions, and then it's done. There's a result to this. It's like baking a pie. I've put it in the oven, I've gotten it out of the oven, and look what I've made. That's not the way that this is dealt with, is it? Because ultimately, when you're parenting children, things can evolve and situations can move on.
Absolutely. There are always going to be new situations that arise. One of you might meet a new partner. There might be exams, and the child might need to be in one home, depending on distances. It could be any number of things. And I suppose if you look at this not as a pie in the oven and then you eat it, but maybe more of a sprint, more of a marathon, sorry, not a sprint, that we have a framework now for dealing with unexpected things, bumps in the road, hurdles that might come your way. The thing to mention though is that when you've been through it and you're using it and you're practicing it, when a bump in the road comes along, you're much more equipped to deal with it, right? So it might still throw you, you might still feel awful, and it might be really upsetting, but you're much more likely to get back on, as my dad always says, get back on the horse. You're much more likely to be able to kind of pick up and go, right, okay, do you know what? I know what I need to do here. It's this, this, and this. The book's got 20 practical tools in it. It's all very kind of grounded stuff. So I just need to go to step three. It's a tool three, or I need to go to, the stress squasher tool, and I need to kind of implement that and get myself back on track. So yeah, I agree. It's not you just do it once, but whilst when you've done it once, it becomes easier to maintain.
And the case studies you use within the book itself are actually quite emotive. Thinking about step one, which is moving to a long term mindset, you write really eloquently about the importance of having a long term mindset and thinking about, sitting down with your children in 20, 25 years' time and what those conversations might look like. I mean, why is that so important, having a long
Because
term mindset?
because your children are going to be adults for much, much longer than they're going to be kids, right? So your relationship with them really needs to stand the test of time. And if you're just in the mindset where they're 3 or they're 5 or they're 8 years old, and you're just in that time period, then it's going to be really difficult to make decisions and modify your behavior maybe, to get to a place where you can have a good adult relationship with them. And the case study you mentioned in, well, one of them in step one is about how, there were parents, and one of them had had an affair, and the other one then tried to discredit them to the kids, and they did that successfully. But when the kids were older, they realized that they'd actually been turning against their mum, and they went back to their mum and they stopped seeing their dad. So it's like you've got to think long term. You've got to think about what you're doing, what you're saying now, because otherwise, you might not be at your kid's wedding. You might not get to see your grandchildren. Think long term, and it will help ground you now to make better decisions so you can have better relationships with your children. It won't be easy, Joe. I'm not saying that this is easy, but it's really, really important that we do it.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I always say to clients, early doors, they might have a child who's 4 and a child who's 8. They're going to be co-parenting on a daily basis for the next 15 years of their lives. And then after that, there's still every birthday, every wedding, christenings, there'll be grandchildren in the picture at some point. It's just really important to think long term, but it's good to have that as the kind of step one, because I think if you can step back from the chalkboard and kind of have a look at what your life is going to look like in terms of your relationship with your child, I think that is helps take the emotion out of it, which brings us, I suppose, quite nicely onto step two, which is managing those strong emotions that come with separation and divorce. And one of the things you advocate in the book is about practicing mindfulness. So can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, and I do say it's mindfulness, but I take it a little bit more broadly than that because that's sometimes one of those words that can make people run a mile, myself included, right? Because I need to reach parents to go, actually, do you know what? This is just about engaging the helpful side of your brain, not the part of your brain that's going to trip you up. And it's really important to have a technique that enables you to do that. So to stop you, to stop that overwhelm, to stop that flood, and to go, oh, everything's going a bit wrong, and I need to get a grip on myself. And I teach the finger and thumb tool, which is really simply about using the touch points on your finger and thumb. Um, so you get very much into the moment that you're in. And what that does, it gives your brain a 20-second reset to breathe and to recalibrate. And brains work really quickly, right? So just that 20-second pause of being in the moment that takes you out of whatever's just happened, the pea kit's come back not washed, or you found out that the affair has started up again. It's not going to solve that, but it's going to help you ground yourself. And when you're grounded, you can make a better response. You can make more informed response. And that's what it is. It's about just helping you, I suppose, get a grip. It is how I say it, but that's my kind of northern. Like I just need to get a grip. But yeah, and that's what it is.
No, I agree. And I think, when you're thinking about managing strong emotions, it's very easy to think from a client's perspective, thinking about it from a legal point of view. It's very easy for a client to think that a lawyer is going to solve all of their problems. But the reality is that when it comes to these issues, it's better dealt with in the sort of support circle, which encompasses all of this sort of support that you might need, whether that is therapeutic support, maybe that's some divorce coaching, maybe that's a co-parenting coach, and thinking about what will work in terms of managing their strong emotions, because otherwise what you end up with is litigated conflict
Mm.
oftentimes, and that's really, really tricky. I mean, do you kind of advocate for the importance of of therapeutic support in terms of your own practice?
Yeah, look, it's really important if somebody needs therapy, go and get therapy. Like I said, this is not a one-stop shop. It's important that we work in this whole sector as kind of a team to support a client, right? So whether they need a therapist, a family therapist, a lawyer, a mediator, a coach, and they need to come on the co-parenting method program, whatever it is, it's like it will be slightly different for everybody. And not everybody will need therapy and not everybody will want to come on a program. But I suppose there's not one service in this whole sector that does everything.
Yeah,
And that's quite important for us to remember that if we really are in a service industry, and we all are, then we need to remind ourselves of that when we meet with our clients. What is it that they need? Do they need legal support? Do they need a different lawyer? Are they getting the right advice? You know, will mediation be the thing that they need to do? How are they working with the finances? Who's the expert there that they're working with? So it's an expensive and complex situation. And, I suppose, like you said earlier about the democratization of using the book as a democracy tool means that it's one less expense for people to have to pay for. And that's really, really important to me. I know I'm going off topic now, but this idea of holding on to a system that I know works so I can make money out of it only feels not ethical. Okay, so I certainly do make money out of the program I run, and I obviously get a percentage of the book sales. But the overarching aim of this is to get it out to as many people as possible. Because ultimately, if we can have parents that can work together, even if they can't stand each other, we've got children who are growing up more resilient, more secure, more stable. We have a better impact on society because those kids are much less likely to do things like risk-taking behavior. They're gonna form better relationships, okay? Their kids are going to be better adjusted. So this is my long-term thinking, right? That if I can get this out there and people like you and others in the family law sector can also get it out to their clients, then together we're gonna use this resource as and it will have a really big impact.
so thinking about practitioners, legal practitioners, and how they're approaching the issue around co-parenting, have you seen any practitioners who had a particular, at least strong reaction to the book? Are there any kind of common tropes that you're seeing in terms of how it's being reacted to? Is there anything that practitioners aren't necessarily considering that they need to be?
I haven't really seen any negative strong reaction to the book, but that just might be because of the circles that I move in. Whereas I'm an active member of Resolution, and I work usually with firms that want to look after the child and look for alternative dispute resolution systems. So it might be that I've just not been exposed to that's quite possible. There are always critics out there, right? But what I would say is, yeah, some people go straight from getting a new client to kind of putting in the court application because it is a well-known route to go down. But the fact that the president has fully endorsed the book and I believe has the book and has told all the other family judges in the country about it, I hope will provide that kind of feedback loop to maybe those practitioners who go, do you know what? My clients aren't going to read a book. They're not going to do a method. We just need to go and get the most money or the most access to their kids as possible. I hope that that kind of comes back full circle and the judge will then go, do you know what? There's a book, I think you need to go and read it, or there's a method you need to go on, or you might need to think a little bit differently about this. And this is the long-term game, right? I can't single-handedly change the system. I don't believe for a moment that it would just be a single-handed thing, but it is a movement and it's important to stand firmly in that side of the movement to protect kids. And I think that a lot of the times when we go to court, that's not the best outcome for kids. We absolutely need to go to court sometimes.
No, I completely agree. Um, in terms of step three, then thinking about boundaries, okay, why is setting boundaries as a co-parent so important?
Well, if you think about it, Joe, when you've been in a relationship with someone, you don't really have many boundaries, right? There are fewer boundaries because, you talk to each other in particular ways, you walk around the house in your pants, whatever it might be. And you're just kind of very much a unit. When you become co-parents, when that relationship ends, there's a lot of untangling to do. And part of that untangling is figuring out what the new boundaries are, right? So, for instance, mum stays in the family home and other parent, mum or dad, feels that's a boundary that needs resetting. How you talk to each other, you can't make inappropriate comments anymore. Maybe humor isn't appropriate anymore because of your situation. So all of these things kind of need to recalibrate. And it's not that I've got a list and go, right, here you are, you need to recalibrate these boundaries because it's different for everybody. But it is a process of learning. And I would say that, kind of it probably takes a year or two to recalibrate all of those boundaries. So step three in the book is about how do you do that? How do you set some boundaries? And we use a tool. I use a tool called the three worlds, and it looks at actually legitimizing the fact that you have your own world and your co-parent has their own world. And actually you don't have any business being in each other's worlds, but you do have business being in the co-parenting world, which is the overlap, if you imagine a Venn diagram. And it's about thinking differently about your co-parenting system. So you respect each other's boundaries and also, and I'm going to use a word that somebody used to me when I was about 18 months into my separation is he said, one of my best friends, John, he said, don't be a doormat, and I was, because I was like in, you know, flux and it was really tricky. And this idea of, what, boundaries don't have to be combative, but they do need to be secure, right? So making sure you're not being walked all over when maybe you've been in a relationship where the power dynamic is a bit off. How do you kind of stand up for yourself again? How do you put those things in place? So that boundary setting is really important.
Do you find that the idea of boundary setting, is it particularly gendered? Is there an issue around the gender aspect of things, or is it completely, open-ended? There are people on both sides of the coin who have issues with setting boundaries and maintaining them.
Both sides of the coin, because the boundaries are different. So, yes, you do get your stereotypical gender boundaries, but crossing those boundaries is equally painful on both sides. And even in kind of same-sex relationships, boundaries are crossed. I wouldn't apply gender to boundaries. I would apply when people feel like they want to win or they want to exert control or power. That is when you often see these boundary issues flaring up.
And in terms of the kind of common tropes that you see in terms of boundaries, are there any kind of common boundaries that are encroached upon, or is it completely different for each couple?
There are some common ones, who does the washing, the family home one that I mentioned before, that one happens a lot. Being late at pickups, drop-offs, that's the boundary that gets crossed an awful lot. You're smiling, so you know that one.
I do know it well.
Yeah, holiday allocation, how you divide the time, how flexible are you? How possessive are you over your kids and their time? All of those things kind of we see crop up again and again in the program. And we do try and address them. And we have like quick fix guides in our resource center because they do happen and people just need to be able to access some thoughts and solutions kind of quickly when they do happen.
So, in terms of boundaries, thinking about when people are post separation and really struggling in terms of the amount of time they're having to spend with their co-parent, we're now in back in term time. We've got parents' evenings, we've got Christmas concerts coming up. Does that mean, for want of a better term, sucking it up for the kids, or is that a boundary that people can reasonably exert in terms of them sitting with their co-parent, or should there be kind of a delineation of mum will arrive and dad will arrive separately, but they're both here to support you?
Well, let's just flip that round and look at it from the children's perspective, right? If you're a child and you're on the stage and you're being an angel in the Christmas nativity play and you look out into the audience, what do you want to see?
You want to see mum and dad together, don't you?
Exactly. So mum and dad probably or parents do need to just suck it up and sit next to each other for the 35-minute show and hug their child together and go, "Little Harry, you were amazing. We're both really proud of you." That's all you need to do. And then you can go your separate ways, right? It might be really difficult to sit next to your co-parent for 35 minutes, but um I wager that if you wanted to, and if it's safe for you to do it, that you can do it, actually.
I think a big part of it is just around this idea of communication, which obviously by the time that you've reached step 4, which is communicating without conflict, you've hopefully been able to manage those strong emotions, you've moved yourself to a long-term mindset, you've set some boundaries that work for your family. Um, you've previously stated that communicating without conflict you consider to be the biggest step in the kind of book. Why is that? Is it because conflict is kind of so nebulous and it can come from anywhere?
Yeah, because it all comes back to communication, really, at the end of the day. It's about whether you've got emotion in that communication. It's whether you're looking at things from a short term or a long term mindset. It's whether you're communicating, having thought about something from your co parent's perspective or not. And all of those things are really critical, as is the language that you use, as is the way that you listen, as is how you reframe sentences so they become less provocative. So yeah, I see communication not just as talking, but absolutely about listening. If you can listen well to somebody, and I say this in the book, then they feel fully heard. And when you feel fully heard, you feel a whole lot better about a situation because you feel like you've been listened to. You don't have to fight your corner as much or even at all. So that step for communicating without conflict is the fundamental piece. If you can't communicate without conflict, you can't make decisions together either, which is step 5.
Now, in terms of listening, you've said that listening is the most important part of it. When you talk about good listening, is that about active listening? Is that about showing that you've heard? Is it about receiving the information and dealing with it? What do we count as good listening?
So there are loads of definitions of active listening. So yes, it is active listening, but it's active listening with a kind of co-parenting lens. So when we listen well, we are hearing what people are saying, but we're understanding the emotion that they're also saying it with. And if we can make somebody feel like they've really been heard, so you lose all your assumptions, for example, you don't assume what someone's going to say. You come at it with an open mind rather than a closed mind based on your, move away from your 20 years of relationships and just come into the present now. It's not easy to do that. There's a tool in the book, of course, on how to do it. But that listening piece, that active listening piece is really important. There are some pieces I want to add on to that though, because you asked the question in a really interesting way. And if you are constantly repeating something back to someone, okay, Joe, so what I've heard you say is that this X, Y, and Z can be really combative. Okay. Even if we think, because a traditional approach to active listening is to say back what you've heard. But in co parenting, actually, that can be quite provocative and passive aggressive. So I don't suggest that we do that, nor do I suggest that we sit in silence because that's stonewalling and that ain't no good either, because people are just going to feel really avoided. So it's about being able to go, all right, thank you, Joe. I've heard what you said. And if you need some time to think about it, I just need to go away and process that. And I'm going to get back to you by Wednesday so they don't feel like you're stonewalling them. That is, one of the ways that then you will go away and you will go, all right, Marcy's heard what I've said. I've got no idea what she's going to come back with, but I know she's going to come back to me by Wednesday. And so I've got a deadline and I feel contained because that's when she's given me a boundary there. There's another boundary in that. And I feel quite okay about that. So does that make sense? Did I waffle?
No, it was fantastic. Now, I think when people think about communication, obviously they're thinking about communication in person, and they're thinking about the words that they're saying. I think that that is pretty understandable. But I think that there are other ways of communicating that people need to be cognizant of, and it's about how they present themselves. So things like interrupting, for instance, they can have a massive effect, can't they, in terms of the way that someone feels heard.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're designed as humans, I think, to interrupt about every 20 seconds. It's probably less now. It's probably more like 15 seconds. And when we interrupt somebody, right, that does not help a conversation. And even though we might be interrupting them to agree and to go, yeah, yeah, I completely agree, you're still talking over someone. You're still asserting power over them, actually. That's kind of the bottom line of it. So just kind of managing yourself to let somebody finish speaking completely is a really big step of that active listening, not interrupting them. And if you need to dig your fingernails into your palm to stop yourself from jumping in, go right ahead, do that. But yeah, interrupting is it's got to be a no.
Now, we don't live in a world where people need to necessarily communicate kind of face to face to get their point across. We thankfully live in a world where there's a lot of tech, things like Our Family Wizard, things like App Close that can assist in communicating, and particularly in the co-parenting space. From your experience, do apps like Our Family Wizard and App Close assist with the communicating when people are kind of starting to get into this framework? Because obviously they've got things like tone meters, or do you think that people need to take more of a step back and actually think about what they're saying and be more active and present in terms of their communication?
I think those apps are really, really good for people who struggle with setting their tone because those tone meters are not just solving a problem, but they are also quite educational. Because when you can see what the app is saying, you can go, oh, really? Okay, maybe I did need to kind of rephrase that. The only thing I would say is that I would always prefer for parents to be able to do this on their own and to be able to do it long term. The very act of not being able to communicate with each other could be seen as kind of putting yourself into conflict. But many, many parents need them. And I always recommend them, those two in particular, um, because they're at least as a stepping stone, at least to get you into a place where you can communicate. And quite frankly, if there are safeguarding issues, please use the app. Do use the app because they are recognized within a court process and they will help safeguard you. And that is really important. There are other things out there which are supposed to have tone meters and they're not very successful. So those two in particular are good, and I would urge anybody that's listening that needs a bit of support with that to go and have a go.
So why Our Family Wizard and App Clips? Why not WhatsApp or emails from your experience?
Well, I think if you can communicate using email and WhatsApp and it's collaborative enough, then that's great. I think the thing that you need to be really careful of is sending very long, lengthy emails because they are really they can feel really controlling or overwhelming to the recipient. So, when we're communicating, keep it subject based, keep it short, keep it neutral, keep it respectful over email. That's really good if you can get to that. And then WhatsApp, there's a feature now where you can edit. So you can say one thing and then edit it. And that can be really tricky for some parents. So if it feels safer for you to use something where everything is recorded, then definitely go to Our Family Wizard.
I think the other point about email, which I think is quite important, is around presumption of tone. So I think
Yes.
when you think about emails in particular, you use them in a workplace setting. You might, get your bank statements via email. It is quite formalistic. And I think what you'd hope is to be able to communicate in a fairly informal way with your co-parent without the kind of hostility and without the kind of, I don't know, formality. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's the aim, isn't it? And if you're struggling getting to there, then just go back to thinking of it like a work email. Imagine you've got a project, a work project with someone, and the person that you have to do it with is someone that you don't massively like. But you've got this really important project that you've got to do together. So you can't both get fired. So you need to kind of communicate respectfully.
Right. So we've moved past step four then. So we've got the foundations. We're starting to build the house and we're building the good decisions now. We're starting to think about making good co-parenting decisions, which is step five. Now, one thing that is kind of very clear in the book is that it's ideal to try and make unemotional decisions. And obviously that takes into account step two. You also discuss the importance of meeting if you can. So to discuss things in person and the fact that that can look like whatever you need it to look like. What is the importance of meeting for you?
If you can do it and you can do it in a very focused way, it can be quite a good indicator to your child that their parents can do something like that, and that can feel quite important to your child. Um, if you are meeting face to face and you are nervous about it, then I really recommend that you go with a very specific agenda, right? Not miscellaneous, but like one or two things. Don't overwhelm yourself. So go to a meeting and say, right, we need to talk about GCSE revision, and go to that meeting, get a cup of tea if you can. Ideally, you'd start to be laying just co-parenting collaboration. That might sound really, really far away to many people right now. But start small. Maybe it's a doorstep, 1 minute discussion about going to watch Johnny's football game or something like that. But if you can normalize this idea of meeting occasionally, then it's going to send a really positive message for your kids. And that is why I kind of advocate for that. Obviously, some parents live really, really far apart. Do it on Zoom if possible. And if it's not possible and you need to do it using an app, then that's okay too. But just be really clear about what the decision is you need to make and don't overwhelm that decision with lots of other things. And if that decision goes well, so if you make that decision together, don't then go, oh, well, we need to talk about this, this, and this. Take your success and walk away until the next time you meet to do the next thing.
I think also there's something quite humanizing about meeting in person, isn't there? Or doing it by Zoom. You kind of realize that they're not this person that's just, it's not ChatGPT sending me this response. It's actually, Billy, who I was previously in a relationship with. I think that
Yeah.
is quite helpful, isn't it?
Definitely, and you can just, if you feel okay to do that, look someone in the eye and just kind of have a conversation. It's easier for people to be provocative when they're typing than it is face to face. That's kind of like step one of conflict resolution, right? So
Yeah. Now, in terms of the book, you talk about the co-parenting plan and the co-parenting charter as well. So can you just give our listeners a little bit more information about those two elements of the book?
Yeah, the charter is, I think, really important. The charter is about how you agree to show up to this idea of co-parenting together, right? Are you going to be collaborative? How are you going to communicate? What are you going to do when things go wrong? And it's about between 10 and 16 points of kind of, what you want it to be like. And that is a behavioral, that's the being part of this whole process. Okay. And then the co-parenting plan does what it says on the tin, right? It's the doing, it's the decisions, it's the things that you need to think about. And the idea of a co-parenting plan, a comprehensive co-parenting plan, and one that has quite a deep level of detail means that those decisions are now made. Okay. And it means that you do not have to come back together and make 25 decisions a week. They're already done. You already know what's expected of each of you and how to do it. That reduces conflict, keeps it at a minimum. Your kids, therefore, experience a much more stable environment. Even if you are going through the co parenting method on your own, or you don't have a co parent, they don't want to engage in this idea of co parenting. For you, going through something like a co parenting plan where you've done all the thinking when you're feeling calm is actually really, really beneficial. I can't overstate that enough. Even if your co-parenting relationship is really good, do a co-parenting plan. It's just a really helpful thing to do. My only other thing I wanted to add to that was, like you said earlier, Joe, your things change, right? Be flexible. The plan for when your child is 3 will not be the same as when they're 15. So
And that's the benefit of a co-parenting plan. I always say this to new clients when they're considering their options, a co-parenting plan is a fluid structure. So say, dad is due to spend time with Billy on a Tuesday after football, and then all of a sudden Billy's is in a football academy and, he can't spend time with his dad
yeah,
anymore because he's going to be doing that far later. Um, that is massively beneficial if it can be fluid. The issue often with a child arrangements order, which is what you'd get if you go to court, is that it provides a more rigid structure. And that doesn't allow for, if you have got an acrimonious relationship, that doesn't allow for you to be reactive to circumstances, which leads then to variation and kind of reopening the wound. If you have a co-parenting plan that you review on a annual, biannual basis, you sit down and go, does this still work? Do we need to amend any points? I think it's massively helpful and it shows the children at the center of this that their parents can deal with conflict, which in turn helps assist their own relationship with conflict. So I think there's a lot of value in parenting plans. The one thing that clients say to me often is that they're not binding. And of course, they're not binding. But if you are going to be true to your word and you trust the other person, it's about having trust in this person that you've been in a relationship with previously. Then hopefully, it will help form good habits and kind of move matters on. Um,
there'll be a lot of people that listen to this and they'll go, well, I don't trust them. And I guess the thing to say to that is, if I'm preempting that, is that you don't need to trust them as a partner. You don't need to trust them as a husband or a wife. You just need to trust them as a parent and that they want to do the best for the kids. So if you make agreements from that place, it becomes easier for people to stick to the agreement.
love that. Thank you for preempting. So then we move on then to step 6. Okay, so we've built the foundations, we've put up the house, and now we're beyond surviving, we're now into thriving. And one thing that you make very clear within the book is that it's about taking control of what you can and investing in those points. It's not about trying to, control everything. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and that mindset? Because I think it is a mindset approach, isn't it?
Definitely. And if you think about your life in general and not just co-parenting, there are things that upset you that you can't control. So whether that's world events, there are things that annoy you that you can influence but not control. And there's actually very little that we can control on a day-to-day basis, right? You can control what you eat, you can control what you say, you can control how much exercise you do. Those things are very centered around ourselves. And it's if we are investing our energy and our time in the other areas, so where you can't control or where you can only have a bit of influence, you're going to be exhausted. You are going to feel frustrated. You are going to be overwhelmed. You're going to get angry. So the reason why, and this is based on a Stephen Covey exercise, which is great, but the reason why I highlight this is because as a co-parent, you need to be resilient. You need to focus on looking after yourself. You need to not expend your energy into things that are just wildly out of your control. Otherwise, you're going to burn out and you're not going to be the best parent you can be in the situation that you're in. So that's why it's important to really look at and be really truthful about what it is you can control. And the book talks about how to let go of some of those things that you can't control and give some ways to do that, which can be life changing for people when they realize and they look at it through that lens.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway from the book was around this idea that you don't need to control every element. And I think for a lot of clients and a lot of people, that's the bit that they struggle with the most. Because what they're thinking is, it's my child, I should have autonomy over everything from the shampoo to the diet to laundry. I should have autonomy. And unfortunately, you just don't have that when you separate it. And I think that when people understand that element, they can be happier with the end results and begin to move their life on from this traumatic situation, which separation is often traumatic. Marcie, it's a very definitive program. Obviously, it's been advocated for by mediators like Maura. It's been advocated for by judges like the Right Honourable Sir Andrew McFarlane. But there will be people out there that, will read the book and think, that's all well and good, but I need a little bit of extra support to be able to enact these steps. So you do have an online program as well, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. And we have an online program. We call it a 4 week sprint, and it's basically a lot of pre-recorded videos which highlight the steps and teach the steps. And then on top of that, there are resources, so scripts, what to do in emergency situations, experts corners, blueprints, and then we run 2 live sessions a week. These are anonymous because they're webinar based. And one is we call it a mastermind session, very grand, but it's looking at an aspect of co-parenting and kind of how, so we've done one on how to blend a family. We've done like a co-parenting SWOT analysis. We've done all sorts of things. And then we also run a Q&A, a live Q&A every week where we answer all your co-parenting questions. And again, it's anonymous. So even if you're doing the program with your co-parent, they don't need to know that that's your question. As well as that, people that sign up have an hour with me where we call it a strategy session, where we look at their specific situation and I write them a 30-day plan of how they can be best supported throughout this and some ideas and some things that they can try. They get another check-in with me after 10 days. And during that 4 weeks, they get direct access to me on something very similar to WhatsApp. It's called Voxer, and they can access me Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and ask me any questions that they need to. So that comprehensive package is more than the book. It's very much about supporting people as they're going through something that's life-changing and difficult. And if I'm allowed to give the price, it's £449 a person for the whole thing.
Well, when you put that into context, if a solicitor is charging 200 to £300 an hour, and you're going to get so much out of this process in 4 weeks, for listeners who are thinking about what their next steps look like, do you consider these options that are available to you? So, Marcie, if people do want to sign up to that, where can they find you?
Oh, they can find me at thecoparentingmethod.com. So they can access the program directly through there, or they can reach out to me on Instagram, follow me at the co-parent way, and you can book a call with us if you want to find out more. That call is free, of course.
Marcie, that's so helpful. Um, I have to say, I am a new convert to the co-parenting method. It's going to be something that I pass along to my clients and new inquiries as they come in, because I just think that it is the way forward for people. This democratization of information, this ability of people to self-soothe, this ability of people to assist themselves outside of a kind of a litigated setting. So if you are interested, listeners, you can find the co-parenting method, 6 steps to raise healthy kids after separation and divorce, on Amazon or wherever good books are sold. Thank you so much for joining us today, Marcie.
Thank you so much, Joe. Really enjoyed talking to you.
All right. And thank you so much for listening. If you have enjoyed today's conversation, please feel free to subscribe on Apple Music and Spotify, and see you again soon. Thank you so much.